Superconductive events. We are witnessing the simultaneous rise, of terrorism as a trans-political form, of AIDS and cancer as forms of pathology, of transsexuality and transvestitism as forms that are sexual and, in a general way, aesthetic. These forms, and these forms alone, are what fascinate us today. Nobody is now the slightest bit interested in sexual liberation, political discussion, organic illnesses, or even conventional warfare, a fact for which we may be grateful so far as war is concerned. A good many wars will not have taken place merely because they held no interest for anyone. Our true fantasies lie elsewhere. Specifically, they focus on the three above-mentioned forms, each of which arises from the skewing of a basic operating principle and the confusion that results from this. These forms, terrorism, transvestitism, and cancer, all reflect excesses on the political, sexual, and genetic levels, respectively. They also reflect deficiencies in, and the consequent collapse of, the codes of the political, sexual, and genetic realms. All these forms are viral, fascinating, indiscriminate, and their virulence is reinforced by their images, for the modern media have a viral force of their own, and their virulence is contagious. Ours is a culture in which bodies and minds are irradiated by signals and images. Little wonder, then, that for all its marvels, this culture also produces the most murderous viruses. The nuclearization of our bodies began with Hiroshima, but it continues endemically, incessantly, in the shape of our irradiation by media, signs, programs, networks. We are subject to a veritable bombardment by superconductive events, by the kind of untimely intercontinental whirlwinds which no longer affect just states, individuals, or institutions, but rather entire transversal structures, sex, money, information, communications, etc. This is not to say that AIDS, financial crashes, computer viruses, and terrorism are somehow interchangeable, merely that they do have a family resemblance. Thus, AIDS is certainly a sort of crash in sexual values, while computers played a virulent role in the Wall Street crash of 1987. Meanwhile, computers are themselves at risk of viral infection, of crashes in the information market. Moreover, infection is no longer confined within a given system, but can leap from one system to another. All these tendencies revolve around one generic scenario, that of catastrophe. Of course, the signs of trouble have long been apparent. AIDS has long since entered its endemic stage. The threat of financial crisis has been ever present since the celebrated precedent of 1929, and computer pirates and electronic accidents have already been with us for over 20 years. But the conjunction of all these endemic forms and their almost simultaneous transition to a state of full-blown anomaly have brought about a unique state of affairs. Their respective effects are not necessarily of the same order in the popular consciousness. AIDS can, of course, be experienced as a genuine catastrophe. The stock market crash seems, by contrast, like a kind of playing at catastrophe. As for computer viruses, for all their dramatic consequences, there is poetic justice here. And when a sudden epidemic strikes the computer world, a common and not incomprehensible reaction, except among computer professionals, is hilarity. The general effect is reinforced by other factors too. Art, which is everywhere susceptible to fraud, to coping, to simulation, and at the same time to the raving hyperbole of the art market, epitomizes a body irradiated by lucre. Consider terrorism. Nothing more closely resembles the chain reaction of terrorism in our irradiated societies than the chain reactions associated with AIDS, the Wall Street raiders, or with software saboteurs. And, by the way, what are these societies irradiated by? By the superfusion of happiness and security, information and communication, by the disintegration of symbolic nexuses, fundamental rules, or social contracts? It is anybody's guess. The contagiousness of terrorism, its fascination, is every bit as enigmatic as the contagiousness of these other phenomena. When a programmer introduces a soft bomb into his software and uses his resultant destructive power as a threat, is he not in effect taking the program and all its applications hostage? Likewise, are corporate raiders not taking and holding businesses hostage when they speculate on their demise or resurrection in the stock market? All these phenomena operate on the same model as terrorism, Hostages have a quoted price, just like shares or pictures, but one might just as easily explain terrorism in terms of a parallel with AIDS, with computer viruses, or with public stock offerings. No phenomenon in this constellation of phenomena has priority vis-à-vis the others. Consider the recent release of an informational diskette on AIDS, which was itself infected by a computer virus. Science fiction? Hardly. In the spheres of information and communication, too, the value of the message is purely that of its circulation, its passage from one image to another, one screen to another. We all get pleasure from this new centrifugal value, from the stock exchange, the art market, or corporate raiders as spectacle. We all enjoy these things as spectacular breathing spaces under capitalism, as byproducts of capital's aesthetic delusions. And we delight in the system's secret pathology, in the viruses that batten on its splendid machinery and send it haywire. In fact, however, the viruses are part and parcel of the hypological consistency of our systems. They follow all the pathways of those systems and even open up new ones. Computer viruses explore possibilities of networks that were never anticipated by those networks' designers. Electronic viruses are an expression of the murderous transparency of information on a world scale. AIDS is the product of the murderous transparency of sex affecting entire human groups. Stock market crashes reflect the murderous transparency of economies with respect to one another and the astounding circulation of values that is the very basis of the liberation of production and exchange. Once liberated, all these processes undergo a kind of superfusion, much like nuclear superfusion, which is in fact their prototype. This superfusion of chains of events is not the least of the charms of our time. Nor, if the succession of events exercises a charm, is unpredictability by any means the least part of it. When a forecast is made, no matter what it may be, it is always tempting to prove it wrong. Events themselves often help us out in this regard. There are over-predicted events, for instance, that obligingly decline to occur, and then there are the exactly opposite kind, those which occur without forewarning. It behoves us to bank on such conjunctural surprises, such backdrafts. We must bet on the wits of events themselves. If we lose, at least we shall have had the satisfaction of defying the objective idiocy of the probabilities. This obligation is a vital function, part of our collective genetic heritage. Indeed, this is the only genuine function of the intellect, to embrace contradictions, to exercise irony, to take the opposite tack, to exploit rifts and reversibility, even to fly in the face of the lawful and the factual. If the intellectuals of today seem to have run out of things to say, this is because they have failed to assume this ironic function, confining themselves within the limits of their moral, political, or philosophical consciousness, despite the fact that the rules have changed, that all irony, all radical criticism now belongs exclusively to the haphazard, the viral, the catastrophic, to accidental or system-led reversals. Such are the new rules of the game. Such is the new principle of uncertainty that now holds sway over all. The operation of this principle is a source of intense intellectual satisfaction, no doubt even of spiritual satisfaction. Think of the computer virus story. Something in us leaps with joy when we hear of an event of this kind. It is not that we have a perverse love of catastrophe. This is not the glee of the doomsayer proved right. No, it is that there is a suggestion of fatality here, and fatality always provokes a certain elation in us. An outcome is fatal when the same sign presides over both the advent of something and its demise, when the same star that gave hope leads eventually to disaster, or, as in the case of computer viruses, when the logic that informs a system's expansion then proceeds to devastate it. The fatal in this sense is the opposite of the accidental. The accidental is peripheral to a system, whereas fatality is imminent. Not that fatality always means disaster. The unforeseeable harvest of fate may also be enchantment. It is quite conceivable that something of this diabolic principle may be found at work, albeit in homeopathically small doses, even in the slight anomalies or tiny malfunctions that affect our statistical universe. Can this wits of events be counted on to come into play every time? Of course not. But the point is precisely that one can never be sure of what is plainly evident. When the truth is incontestable, it loses credibility on that account. Even science is liable to be caught short. There is nothing academic about the thesis that statistical truths can always be refuted. On the contrary, it is a hope put about by the evil genie of a quintessentially popular wisdom. Once upon a time, there was much talk of the apathy of the masses. Their silence was the crucial fact for an earlier generation. Today, however, the masses act not by deflection, but by infection, tainting opinion polls and forecasts with their multifarious fantasies. Their abstention and their silence are no longer determining factors. That stage was still nihilistic. What counts now is their use of the cogs in the workings of uncertainty. Where the masses once sported with their voluntary servitude, they now sport with their involuntary incertitude. Unbeknownst to the experts who scrutinize them and the manipulators who believe they can influence them, they have grasped the fact that politics is virtually dead and that they now have a new game to play, just as exciting as the ups and downs of the stock market. This game enables them to make audiences, charismas, levels of prestige, and the market prices of images dance up and down with an intolerable facility. The masses had been deliberately demoralized and de-ideologized in order that they might become the live prey of probability theory, but now it is they who destabilize all images and play games with political truth. They are merely playing as they have been taught to play, speculating on the bourse of statistics and images. This speculation is total and immoral, just like that of financial speculators. In the face of the idiotic certainty and inexorable banality of numbers, the masses are an incarnation, on the margins, of the principle of uncertainty in the sociological sphere. As the powers that be strive to organize their statistical order, and the social order is now a statistical order, so it falls to the masses to look, in clandestine fashion, to the interests of statistical disorder. It is from this viral, diabolic, ironic, and reversible posture of the masses that we are perhaps entitled to expect some unprecedented development, some bits of the events themselves. This society now produces only ill-defined events, whose ultimate clarification is unlikely. In earlier times, an event was something that happened. Now it is something that is designed to happen. It occurs, therefore, as a virtual artifact, as a reflection of pre-existing media-defined forms. The virus that wreaked havoc for 5 hours in the US scientific and military computer network may have been just a test, as Paul Virilio has suggested, an experiment carried out by American military intelligence itself, an event at once stage-managed and simulated. Either a true accident, then, bearing witness to the effective virulence of such viruses, or a total simulation showing that the most effective strategy today is calculated destabilization and deception. The verdict is not yet in. Even if the hypothesis of an experimental simulation were to be confirmed, moreover, this would in no way guarantee that the process involved was under control. A test virus can always turn into a killer virus. No one can control chain reactions of this kind, and any simulated accident is potentially an accident of simulation. What is more, we know that any natural accident or catastrophe may be claimed as a terrorist act, and vice versa. There is no limit here to the hyperbole of hypotheses. It is in this respect, in fact, that the whole system is globally terroristic. A greater terror than the terror of violence and accident is the terror of uncertainty and dissuasion. A few years ago, a group that had staged a mock holdup was penalized more heavily than they would have been for an actual robbery. The fact is that attacks on the reality principle itself constitute a graver offense than real-life violence. What is constant is an immense uncertainty, an uncertainty which lies at the core of the present operational euphoria. The natural sciences were the first to describe a panic situation of this kind. It is the disappearance of the respective positions of subject and object at the experimental interface that has given rise to a definitive state of uncertainty about the reality of the object and the objective reality of knowledge. Science itself seems to have fallen under the sway of its strange attractors. But the same goes for the economy, whose resurrection is apparently bound up with the total unpredictability that now reigns within it. Likewise, the sudden expansion of data handling techniques is seemingly tied to the indefiniteness of the knowledge with which these techniques are designed to deal. Are all techniques of this kind actively engaged with the real world? It is extremely doubtful. The aim of science and technology would seem to be much more that of presenting us with a definitively unreal world beyond all criteria of truth and reality. The revolution of our time is the uncertainty revolution. We are not ready to accept this. Paradoxically, however, we attempt to escape from uncertainty by relying even more on information and communication systems, so merely aggravating the uncertainty itself. This is a forward flight. The pursuit race of technology and its perverse effects, of man and his clones around a track in the form of a Mobius strip, has only just begun.